There is something fishy going on here, and I cannot take it anymore. What is the deal with Mercedes and their new team mascot? And no, I'm not talking about George Holy Moly Russell, I'm talking about the other one. You know, the one that Lewis Hamilton fans probably hopes crashes out and sends Toto into the Shadow Realm or something like that. Seriously, have you seen what they've been doing, combining the Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton logos? It's only day 2. I jest somewhat, but now that the multiple world champion has begun his transformation into the figurehead of Scuderia Ferrari, Mercedes are busy themselves in preparing for their lives after Lewis, as the boss of Formula One himself, Stefano Domenicali, has dubbed the Golden Boy, being Kimi Antonelli. Is not only Kimi Antonelli the Mercedes equivalent of Max Verstappen, but he's now also the Mercedes equivalent of Charles Leclerc. They are creating some sort of Franken-driver of Toto just going, "Ah yes, it's alive, it's alive, it's alive!" Needless to say, having this level of attention for a young man is something that will surely, at the time and in the short term, feel kinda awesome for the likes of Antonelli. It's not every day that a rookie arrives in the sport with this level of hype surrounding them, and to have it somewhat justified. And especially when considering that they weren't really in contention for the Formula 2 title. But I reckon that there is a fairly reasonable explanation as to why he wasn't in championship contention, which I will go into later on in the video, so do hang in there. But just because of 2024, I think the world is taking a somewhat dim view towards the likes of Antonelli and thinking that maybe he isn't all that he's cracked up to be, that his adaptability is not so good, that Formula Regional was a fluke. But I do think that there is something to this kid, otherwise Toto wouldn't have promoted him. They would have put Mick Schumacher in instead. And what doesn't help is considering that this is the guy who is replacing the best thing that ever happened to Mercedes F1 operations. And it's seriously big shoes to fill. I mean, take a look at what happened to the guy who replaced him at the last team that he was at. Checo replaced Lewis back in McLaren in 2013. And you've really got to remember that the hype surrounding Checo in 2012 was remarkable. He was the Bog's Dollocks. And then he went to McLaren, and that was right at the beginning of their decline, the descent. No podiums in 2013, not even JB could get one. And that basically set the tone and cast Sergio Perez into the midfield for all eternity. And I reckon the same thing will happen with the likes of Oliver Behrman come 2027, if Ferrari's plan to have him become next in line in terms of who's going to be succeeding either Leclerc or Hamilton actually continues at pace, and Behrman is still around come 2026 or 2027 if he does a good enough job with Haas. If Mercedes was going to make this move, 2025 would be the right year to do it upon reflection, right when the 2026 development window is now allowed to resume, it being now January the 2nd. Kimi right now is installed in the team, and that means the development of the W17 can now continue with George and Antonelli being the two drivers that will be continuing. I'm not really going to be talking about George Russell much today because I pretty much think that Toto will just leave him to his own devices. He doesn't have to worry about that guy anymore. He can now take care of himself because he is now quite clearly wanting to have aspirations of going for the world title, considering that the 2025 grid is the most open of this current regulation cycle, or maybe in this current generation of driver talents and the pool itself. So Toto, Mercedes, they could just leave him to it. Kimi is the main prize. Toto has been waiting for this day for quite a long time, and now it is here. The preparation of Antonelli is Mercedes' top priority right now, and I suspect that it began with the sudden withdrawal of Kimi from the final race of the F2 2024 season, with no time for PREMA to even field a possible substitute, which I did find pretty strange. On the surface, there were reports saying that Kimi Antonelli ultimately had the flu, and thusly he was too sick to compete in the final 2 races of the Formula 2 season, and many people didn't question it. But what I did find really suspicious, and it really makes me reach for the foam of doubt, is that he also did not take part in the Super Formula test not long afterwards, which was very intriguing. And it just made me think, well, why not? It would have been really good preparation for driving in the Japanese Grand Prix, considering that he was not eligible at the time of the 2024 Japanese Grand Prix to take part in an FP1 session for Mercedes. This would have been a really good opportunity. Behrman took it and was really solid. Is there something going on here? Is Toto wanting to manipulate certain things? Well, hang on a minute, Law. Maybe Kimi was ill. Maybe they just didn't want to take a risk and he might have gotten worse in the cockpit and he might not have been able to take part in the afternoon Abu Dhabi test session at all. Yeah, he might have been feeling less than 100%, but for him to miss out the Super Formula test as well as the F2 one, That made me want to reach for the foam of doubt, as it did with the likes of racer Alex Rossi, who speculated that there was an ulterior motive for Antonelli to have missed the final race of the season, as well as the more discreet Japanese-based event. He was thinking about the idea of maybe those two sessions potentially interrupting or compromising the stock value of Kimi Antonelli. That maybe, if he was doing too much in a short space of time, it might lead to an incident or an accident or a crash or him not being fast enough in another series, because you gotta remember, if he were in Super Formula, he would have been compared with Behrman yet again. And if there was a possibility that Behrman outpaced Antonelli, it would have seriously not helped, because that would have been after Abu Dhabi. Yeah, it would have really added to the narrative of 2024 being a duff year for Kimi. So I suspect the idea of pulling him out of both of those competitions just made a lot of sense. And if you're a racing driver out there, just tell me, if you were ill, how far would you push it to make sure that you would continue racing? And I know that many people out there, if it was possible and they would continue to keep on going on the track, they would do it. You got to only remember what happened with Mark Webber in 2007 when he practically vomited in his own helmet. He kept going, much like how I'm keeping going, even though I've really got a bad throat. So, lubrication and all that's really, really important. Stay hydrated, as Max Verstappen once said. As I touched upon earlier in the video, the world is waiting with bated breath as to how he will fare in a front-running car, and at only the age of 18, replacing somebody who is the most decorated F1 driver of all time, and over double his age, that's a tall order. Especially considering that Antonelli wasn't in contention for the F2 title. Or had he been in contention for the title, things might have been different. Antonelli sat out the morning, they got Frederick Vesti in, so they got the further diversification of understanding the car, and then Kimi went in the afternoon, and oh, would you look at that? The 5th fastest time with tyres that was slightly harder than the likes of George Russell, who set a slightly faster time on the C6 tyres, which we will probably never see. It meant that Mercedes could control the narrative and end 2024 on a high note, meaning that Antonelli was posting times that weren't all that dissimilar to what Lewis Hamilton was pulling in Abu Dhabi not that long ago. Yes, I know. Test times cannot be taken seriously and fully as read. There are multiple factors at play here, which we, the public, are not aware of, and of course, the teams might want to try and pull some glory runs off and make sure that we go into the winter with a certain perspective aimed toward them, and Mercedes were doing just that. Antonelli near the top of the standings? Yes, I'm pretty sure that Kimi is talented, and I'm pretty sure that he does have the potential to do fairly well in Formula 1. But 5th fastest? Oh, yeah. And not that far from George Russell? Oh, yeah. That is clearly Toto and Mercedes making it clear that both of these drivers are going to be really close to one another, and why I think Red Bull, Lawson, Verstappen, it's going to be imperative for them to be just as close, just as effective, or else it could compromise them in the constructors later on. Mercedes might do better than Red Bull. Oh, yeah. And also, it's vital for Toto to control the narrative of Antonelli right now before the first round of 2025 kicks on and preseason testing in a way, after what went down. Not just Formula 2, but that second lap crash of Kimi Antonelli at the Italian Grand Prix FP1 session. But then you realise that maybe Toto was just thinking of the long term, because he was really unusually calm about the entire situation. He actually praised Kimi, and in a way you could argue he's kind of acting like Christian Horner, because he was saying, at least Kimi had a go. No, it doesn't sit right. Toto shouldn't be saying that kind of stuff. And in regards to sitting out the final 2 races of the Formula 2 season, let's be real, PREMA really did him a disservice in 2024, as well as his teammate Oliver Behrman. Put simply, the brand new regulations were not kind to PREMA or their drivers. You do get the impression that at the beginning of the season, many teams were struggling to get to grips with the rules and understanding the machines and setting up the car. PREMA, though, they were absolutely dreadful. It was only until the middle of the season that they managed to get something where both of their drivers could be in contention for feature race wins, or in the case of Behrman, having a clutch of sprint race victories. It was something that was a real major cause for concern, and something that Toto Wolff really did not want to happen, because it compromised his boy and how the public viewed him, especially after such a dominant year in Formula Regional, where he completely trounced the field. His junior career before then was electric in Italian Formula 4, and then Formula 2 comes around and he says, wait a minute, where is the title? Where is the big cup? There is supposed to be a big freaking cup here. It ruled out Antonelli and Behrman from being championship contenders. And if you look at the team's historical results in F2 in contrast with the other results in other series, Formula 2 is easily PREMA's worst series in terms of trying to stay near the top. You get the impression that PREMA is mainly managing its reputation just because it's really good at the lesser formulae. Formula 3, F4, Formula Regional, they have pretty much got them sewn up, and drivers that race for them are practically guaranteed to do well, because some championship seasons, they can be the class act of the field. Other examples, 2019 may I remind you, they can be as low as 9th place. Most of the time it's between like 2nd or 5th or something like that. And that level of inconsistency is a major cause for concern and something that really should have been a bit of a red flag in terms of placement in terms of Kimi. But he was with PREMA before, so what would have changed? When you put it into that context and realise how inconsistent PREMA can be in Formula 2, Kimi Antonelli outclassing Oliver Bearman and being 6th place in the championship is still not that bad. He was in the top 10. He was bagging quite a lot of top 5 finishes. He got a couple of victories. He was on the podium 3 times, which is not too shabby considering that the first half of the year, PREMA were sinking. They were terrible. He even managed to collect a few faster laps along the way, but you do get the impression that come the end of the season, and what was at stake here, before the shutdown and then essentially the wilderness period of all Formula 1 fans, Toto had had enough and clearly was just thinking, well, there's nothing to lose here by just pulling Kimi out and focusing just on the Abu Dhabi Young Driver test for Formula 1. So yeah, as part of Mercedes' revenge arc, shift the focus for Kimi into what he could do with Mercedes, a team where Toto could control the narrative entirely. Give his young apprentice all the time, tools and machinery he would ever need to start his F1 career with on the right foot. And now, on top of that, bringing back Valtteri Bottas, part of the dream team that got Mercedes so much glory, himself getting 10 victories with the team, it does make it clear that they intend to really give rookie the best start to Formula 1 that they can possibly give him, as well as probably doing more publicity stunts with Valtteri. Come on. I mean, can you imagine that? Valtteri and Kimi working together, doing funny social media antics, the guy with the mullet and the young Italian. It's going to be absolutely magical. I'm looking forward to that. And by the way, they're actually making use of Kimi right now in manners that I don't think I've ever seen happen with George or Lewis. The latest publicity stunt that they did with him was driving a prototype CLA to the Alps or something like that and generating enough electricity to then light up a Christmas tree. Okay, that sounds a little bit oddball, it sounds a little bit unorthodox, but it's interesting. It feels like they are now starting to craft this young man into their ideal team leader, that they are pure Mercedes. Because one thing you got to consider here is that even though Toto and Lewis were like that, and Lewis had a lot of glory with the team, that Lewis was his own man, and that he was free to express himself, as I talked in my video yesterday. One of the reasons why Lewis liked being at Mercedes was because he was able to be his own person, and Kimi Antonelli is the next step in that, being able to then take what they've learned from Hamilton in terms of public perception and PR and relations, and in some cases fashion consultancy, and then go forward from there. And look, of course, just because a team uses their driver for publicity stunts doesn't mean that they are fast or the team will be fast. I mean, you've only got to look at what happened with Sauber. All of their social media posts didn't make them faster, but it does give you the impression that Antonelli is intended to be with the team for the long haul. He will be their Max Verstappen or Charles Leclerc, the German manufacturer's golden boy, as Dominicali said. Yeah, all right, Law, you've talked all about this. You speculated and yapped on long enough, but what do you think about him really? Well, I certainly don't think he'll be at the back of the grid or anything like that. After his little snafu at Monza, in Mexico, when he actually took an FP1 session and saw it through, he was one of the faster rookies there. He was fairly solid. I think he got like 12th or something like that. So he wasn't far off the points in just one session where drivers are not really pushing flat out. And besides, based on the amount of investment the team has put into making sure that he gets into Formula 1 right now at the age of 18, the youngest driver on the grid by a fairly sizable margin in comparison to Bearman, I don't think he's going to be exiting out of Q1 because also the car is developed and consistent enough to no longer be there. I don't think it's going to be a problem. But you've also got to admit that Wolff's conduct with him during 2024 has been inconsistent. Sometimes he's actually been quite measured and pragmatic. Other times he can be overly optimistic and sometimes delusional. And it really wasn't helped with PREMA dropping the ball, like I said earlier, with setups and comprehending the new car. It just made it completely look like Toto didn't know what he was talking about. But at least you could see that Toto deeply cares for Kimi, that he wants the best for the guy. He wants to make sure that he is their man, the man that he can look to for the next 5, 10, 15 years. For as long as he's in the sport, they want to make sure that he is looked after, which is a far cry, a completely distant shout to what you're seeing at Alpine right now. You get the impression that Jack Doohan, he has it all to do. Even though he got his own fair share of development time with the Alpine Academy, just like with Oscar Piastri, but going forward, considering where I think the team is going to be going, his days already seem to be numbered. That Briatore might have buyer's remorse, that they might be regretting making the decision on the second driver so soon, especially with Franco Colapinto knocking around. He's basically said that if either Pierre or Jack are not performing as expected, then the team wouldn't be afraid to replace them outright, or in some cases, mid-season. Now, on the surface, it's meant to be a statement for both pilots, but considering that Briatore goes on in his statement to praise Gasly for his achievements in 2024, to bring Alpine back to where they were in 2023, I think this is squarely aimed at Jack. As far as I reckon, I think that Team Anston does not see Jack Doohan as their future, more like a stopgap, and I think that's incredibly unfair. Jack has done his time. He has been their main guy since Oscar Piastri moved to McLaren. He's brought in some really solid results. He was quite up there in Formula 2. He's done everything that Alpine has asked him to do, save for winning the F2 championship, but he's still got enough super license points, more than enough, to be able to qualify for at least a chance in Formula 1. It just seems unfair and a little bit ruthless to be condemned before he's barely started a full season. In Abu Dhabi, he was okay. It was a solid performance after getting a last-minute call-up unexpectedly. So come on, lay off the kid. For sure, Mercedes is not doing that. They are seeking to reimagine themselves at the same time, with a strong pedigree in the sport back in the day, but they're looking to move on now to no longer be one of those teams that go, we used to be great, why are we not great now? The Lewis Hamilton arc, that's done. And what the team is now wanting to do with Antonelli and Russell, and shaping his first initial steps as a rookie into the sport, are quite notable. I really do get the impression that the original plan for Toto was to put Kimi in Formula 2 and just going, look at Kimi in the PREMA car, he's going to completely dominate the field. No, it's not exactly happening. Why is he at the back? Why is the car retiring? Why is he not winning races all the time? PREMA, tell me what is going on here. You are ruining my plan! And as such, that last gap curtailment and focus on just one afternoon of running in the W15 was imperative in order to establish somewhat positive headlines in time for the first few runs of the car in testing, and then in Melbourne. And you might be thinking that by talking him up so early and that I'm part of the problem, but I would disagree with that train of thought. You see, I'm not like one of these people who are thinking, yes, he's going to win the World Championship on debut. He's going to be on the podium on debut in Melbourne 2025, just like Lewis Hamilton was, the one he's replacing back in 2007. No, he's not going to be doing that. Come on, let's be real. Points? Possibly. Albeit maybe just a smattering them, like 1 or 2 or something like that. That's a fairly realistic target, considering that the gap between the top 4 teams and then Aston Martin and Alpine, it's quite a big chunk. I suspect that Toto has learned a thing or two from how he conducted himself with Kimi. He got overexcited about the situation, and I think that come next season, he will be keeping the young Italian driver in some sort of bubble. That maybe he will just be, instead of focusing on how he compares to George, if he's going to be there for a very, very, very long time, why rush things? He's going to be having Bono as his race engineer. Pete Bonington, the guy who helped Lewis to so many world championships, the guy who's staying put at Mercedes. That is a hugely impressive race engineer to be starting out with, and they're just going to be finding their feet together. It's going to be a long-term relationship here. So why focus on getting wins and victories and podiums right now? If they come, they come. Great. But just don't try and set expectations. Just learn. That's the only real expectation that I have for the kid, for him to really understand how Mercedes works and fully get to grips with it. Now that I think about it, it might be a better yardstick for Kimi if you really want to compare him to somebody. Compare him to Liam Lawson. Now look, I know you're sick and tired of people talking about him, including I am too. Look, as far as I'm concerned, he's got the Red Bull seat now. Let's just see how he fares and how things go in 2025 for he and Red Bull. However, in the context of Antonelli over at Mercedes, the way that both men are being acclimated to their respective teams will be a fascinating story to watch unfold in 2025. Because as things start to develop, I really get the impression that the future establishing of them at those respective teams are quite different stories, and seeing them mesh and then come apart again is going to be very intriguing. On one side, you've got Mercedes wanting Kimi to fully understand the team as much as possible, really get stuck in and invest his time into it, to then fully blossom into a fully fledged champion in waiting. And then you've got Liam Lawson, according to Helmut Marko. I know it's Helmut Marko, but do hear me out here. He's basically being told to just turn up, drive the car, go home. Don't get yourself ensconced in it. Don't get obsessed about it. Don't worry about Max Verstappen. Just accept that he's faster than you and just roll with it. Don't get involved in the technical side of things. What? No, that's completely nonsensical. Any driver will want to extract as much performance and potential from their car as possible. They don't want to be told that they are just there to turn up and drive the car and then that's it. Don't fully understand it, because surely that was partly why Checo struggled, that the car was moving away from him. Unless Liam Lawson's driving style is very similar to that of Max Verstappen, there is going to be a problem here where Liam is not as effective as the team needs him to be. And that could be the differentiator between Mercedes and Red Bull and their place in the constructors, and maybe Toto's team coming out ahead of Christian. Yes, of course, you got to be thinking about the lead driver, Max versus George. But you just got to be seeing that Mercedes, I think they're going to be consistently improving over 2025. Red Bull, it's far less clear. They might do as well. They might surge back right to the top again. Or they could just sort of plateau, thinking about 2026, because Max is not a fan of those rules. They need to make sure that that car is fast from the get-go. Maybe they might sacrifice 2025, a year of learning. But it means that in the short term, I think Antonelli might get the jump over Lawson simply for the fact that the team is willing to embrace him. Whereas with Lawson, they are just like praying he doesn't put his toes out of line and upset the team leader. I have more confidence in him with that car than I do with Lawson in the Red Bull car. The team has been doing everything possible to make sure that it does so as part of their new era. Whereas with Red Bull, they're just sort of treading water. To find out my final words on Liam Lawson and why I expect that Red Bull have got a really tricky balancing act in which to try and make sure it doesn't come crashing down, go and watch this video next, straight after this one.